to episode 3 of my favorite series. I like big boats, and I cannot lie. The weekly ordeal where I talk about my favorite thing, submarines. I hope your week has been joyful and positive. There's a brand new week ahead of us, and it's looking quite nautical. In times like these, we must all take time for self-care and relaxation. Let's begin by thanking our bodies and our beautiful brains for guiding us through the tumultuous times of the modern world, and taking a few moments to get settled for the episode. The week ahead is full of challenges, so let's face them together as friends and fellow relaxation seekers. As always, I hope my nonsense puts you right to sleep. This week begins on the 29th of September and extends to the 5th of October. Let's begin with the USS L2 SS-41, an L-class submarine built by the Four River Shipbuilding Company of Quincy, Massachusetts. She was commissioned on the 29th in 1916. From there, she participated in exercises along the Atlantic coast until arriving in Key West, Florida for experimental submarine warfare until March 1917, when she began preparing for World War I service. Next we have the USS Jaleo SS-368, a Vallejo-class submarine named for a pearl white food fish found in the Gulf of Mexico. Her keel was laid on the 29th of September 1943 by Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. I honestly had no idea shipbuilding was ever done in Wisconsin, but I suppose parts of it do touch water, so that can be a possibility. After launching in March of 1944 by Mrs. Oliver G. Kirk, a commissioning in 8 July 1994, and a few weeks spent training, Jaleo sailed to Chicago and was loaded into a floating dry dock down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. That's fascinating. I never thought of the Mississippi River as a waterway for a submarine to go down, but it makes sense. They were pretty small boats, 307 feet long, 17-foot draft, 27-foot beam. The Mississippi is a big river. Imagine standing on the bank in New Orleans watching that roll into town. How fun that would have been for me. I don't know about anyone else. The 30th of September 1954 brings the momentous occasion of the commissioning of the USS Nautilus, SSN 571, the very first nuclear-powered submarine. Named for the Captain Nemo's fictional vessel, in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and the USS Nautilus that served in World War II, the nuclear-powered Nautilus was laid down 14 June 1952. She was launched on the 21st of January 1964, sponsored by Mamie Eisenhower, First Lady of the United States, and commissioned as mentioned. Nautilus broke record after record with her S-2W nuclear reactor and steam turbines that powered 2 shafts, propelling the new submarine at a speed of 23 knots. She could stay underwater far longer than any diesel submarine, as realistically, her only limitation was her food supply. There's a lot to say about Nautilus, and I could probably do an entire video on her, but I'll just stop short before I start gushing. Say she's available for tours at the Submarine Force Museum in Groton, Connecticut, and she is so very cool. I've taken a tour of her. I live, let's say, closer to the East Coast than the West, and I went to Connecticut to visit a friend, and I convinced them to come with me to see it. We had a great time. In 1983, we have the USS Gudgeon, SS-567. Gudgeon was a tank-class submarine built by Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in 1950. She survived 2 conversions in her career, and after serving in the United States for over 30 years, was sold to the Turkish Navy. 3 years later, in 1986, the Nemo DSV-5 was decommissioned September 30th. Well, she was transferred to other government agencies. Wikipedia says likely the CIA on this date. No clue what happens to her after this, but I wanted to make note of her existence. We'll talk more about Nemo in the future. She left government service in 2011 and was transferred to the U.S. Navy Seabee Museum at Naval Base Ventura County, California. Her post-decom career remains a full mystery. Ooh, spooky. Not something I want to know about. That is a secret that can stay with the boat. Thank you very much. Now we're in a completely new month, October. October 1st has a lot of entries. It was difficult to pare it down to just a few for the sake of the video. But first, we have the USS Barracuda, SS-163. She was a V-boat, which I believe we talked about last week, or a few days ago, technically. Her keel was laid at the Portsmouth Navy Yard. On 17 July 1924, she was launched as V-1, sponsored by Mrs. Cornelia Wolcott Snyder, wife of Captain Snyder, before decommissioning on 1 October 1924. Next we have the Barracuda. Yes, again. This time it's the SSK-1. Originally known as USS K-1, Barracuda was the lead ship of her class, the third to be named for the nasty little fish. Fun fact, President Jimmy Carter served as an officer on Barracuda as part of its pre-commissioning crew and part of its first year of active service. In 1968, following a redesignation, Barracuda was transferred to Charleston, South Carolina, and served as a training platform until her decommissioning and simultaneous striking from the Naval Vessel Register October 1st, 1973. 1941 brings the keel laying of the USS Haddo, SS-255, a Caddo-class diesel-electric sub built by Electric Boat Company of Groton, Connecticut. Rather than mention her twice in 2 weeks, I'll say she was commissioned on the 9th of October, 1942, after a launching on the 21st of June, sponsored by Mrs. Charles F. Russell. In 1944, the USS Quillback, SS-424, was launched from Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine. Quillback, a Tench-class submarine, was sponsored by Mrs. J. A. Tyree, Jr. Originally, her name was to be Trembler, but as of 7 December 1943, she was given a less embarrassing name. Can you imagine being stationed on the Trembler, the boat that trembles? Oh yeah, real brave. I would absolutely love that. Tench-class submarines such as Quillback were built between 1944 and 1951. They were a successor to an improvement over the Caddo and Baleo class submarines, more strongly built, with a better design, internal layout, all the good stuff. 29 were completed, but around 51 were cancelled when it became evident they were not needed to defeat Japan in World War II. Tench class were diesel electric subs around 311 feet in length, with a 27-foot beam and a 17-foot draft. Propelled by 4 diesel engines and 2 low-speed direct drive electric motors for their 2 propellers, with 2 126 Silsargo batteries. They could survive at a depth of 400 feet. We have a bit of a change for the 2nd of October. The thing I'd like to talk about is fairly recent news. In 2021, the Seawolf-class USS Connecticut, SSN-22, which has also been in the news for a horrible bedbug infestation, was damaged in a high-speed collision with a seamount in the South China Sea. Luckily, there were no fatalities. It appears they were suffering from some technical issues, such as faulty ANBQQ-10 bottom sounders, which are part of the boat's sonar system. When any part of the boat reads an improper location, or the charts are inaccurate, or anything like that, the waters can suddenly turn into minefields of potential danger. Realistically, a lot of what seems to plague Connecticut is what affects many members of the military and society in general, make no mistake, but I'm speaking entirely through a focused lens here. That is a lack of care given to general crew members by their command. They're on so many deployments with so few breaks between. There's no blue or gold crew to take over, only one crew managing everything to keep the boat running as often as possible. They're tired, overworked, and stressed, and the mental health support is a joke. Connecticut's commanding officer, executive officer, and chief of the boat were released from their duties over the incident. When something this major happens, everyone who is at fault disappears, and that's a good thing in this instance. But that's just my opinion, and realistically, what do I know? Connecticut has been sent to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, to be patched up. They expect her back on the water by 2026. Connecticut is the second of 3 Seawolf-class submarines. She was launched on the 1st of September, 1997 by Mrs. Patricia L. Rowland, wife of John G. Rowland, Governor of Connecticut. She was commissioned on the 11th of December, 1998. Her current home port is Naval Base Kitsap, Bremerton, Washington. Her motto is Arsenal of the Nation. I'm glad nothing terribly extreme happened, and I hope they can fix her up soon. Moving on to October 3rd, we have the USS Adder, SS-3, way back in 1900. The Adder was one of 7 plunger-class submarines. Her keel was laid down on the 3rd at the Crescent Shipyard in Elizabethport, New Jersey, by Lewis Nixon, a subcontractor for the Holland Torpedo Boat Company of New York City. Plunger-class boats succeeded the USS Holland, the first submarine of the United States Navy. They were 60 feet long, almost 12 feet wide, and held 1 officer and 6 enlisted men. They could reach a depth of 150 feet at 7 knots submerged, powered by a 70 horsepower electric motor. The entire armament was 1 torpedo tube and 3 torpedoes. Pretty impressive for the first decade of the 20th century, in my opinion, but terrifyingly frail compared to modern standards. 59 years later, we find ourselves at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California, the launching of USS Theodore Roosevelt, SSBN 600. Her sponsor was Alice Roosevelt Longsworth, daughter of the boat's namesake. Roosevelt, a George Washington-class ballistic missile submarine, was part of the 41 for Freedom, the goal of a nuclear deterrent set in the 1960s. George Washington subs carried 16 Polaris missiles and 12 torpedoes to fire out of their 6 torpedo tubes. Essentially, a George Washington is just a skipjack class with a 130-foot missile compartment shoved in the middle of it, between the control area and the reactor compartment. This seems to happen a lot, most notably to me with the USS Jimmy Carter, a Seawolf with 100 extra feet of Seawolf installed in the center. At least with George Washington, they didn't have to cut the boat in half. Moving on, we have the USS Octopus, SS-9, a C-class submarine launched on the 4th of October 1906. Her sponsor was Mrs. F. Webster. She was laid by Four River Shipbuilding in Quincy, Massachusetts, under an electric boat company subcontract. C-class boats were the first in the fleet with 2 propeller shafts, powered by 2 Craig Shipbuilding Company 500 horsepower gasoline and two 300 horsepower electrodynamic electric motors. 1944 sees the decommissioning of USS S-16, SS-121, and SS-17-122, two S-3 or government class boats laid down on the 19th of March 1918 by the Lake Torpedo Boat Company in Bridgeport, Connecticut. S-16 was sunk off the Key West, Florida coast on the 3rd of April 1945, and S-17 was sunk on the 5th. The Yards built 51 S-class submarines in 7 years. Between the two world wars, these boats made up the bulk of Navy service and could be found just about everywhere. They were the first subs to be designed for open ocean operations with greater speed and range than previous boats, as well as improved habitability and armaments. Last day of the week, friends. October 5th. In 1936, we have the launching of the USS Permit, SS-178, a Porpoise-class diesel-electric sub originally laid down by Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut as the Pinna. SS-178 was the first boat to be named Permit. Her sponsor was Mrs. Edith B. Bowen, wife of Harold G. Bowen, chief of the Bureau of Engineering. The 5 Porpoise boats built at Portsmouth and Mare Island Navy Yards were the last subs to be built with a riveted construction method. The 5 built by Electric Boat were the first all-welded subs in the United States Navy. Porpoise-class subs were about 300 feet long with a beam of almost 25 feet. Their top speed surfaced was 18 knots, propelled by 4 1,300 horsepower Winton diesel engines driving electrical generators. 4 years later, USS Gatto, SS-212, was laid down by Electric Boat Company of Groton, Connecticut. Gatto was the lead ship in her class of 77, built between 1940 and 1944. 77 boats in 4 years. Wow. Along with the Blair and Tench class, Gatto made up much of the Navy's World War II submarine force. At this time, submarine warfare was especially vital, and a good submarine design meant a world of difference for the sailors fighting there. Gatto was quite a large boat for the time, 311 feet with a 27-foot beam, and like most of the fleet subs in World War II, had a partial double hull. The void between the two hulls allows for spaces for fuel and ballast. They could travel 50 feet deeper than their predecessors. Lastly, the USS Omaha, SSN-692. In the year 1995, the Los Angeles-class boat Omaha, third of her name, was decommissioned and struck from the Naval Vessel Register. Her inactivation ceremony was held at Naval Submarine Base, Pearl Harbor. Is that the first time I've mentioned Pearl? Feels like it. She was brought over to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, to be recycled in their ship and submarine recycling program. As of 2012, her recycling was complete, but her sail and rudder were reserved for placement in a memorial park in Omaha, Nebraska. That's it for this week, folks. I hope you're all fast asleep.